At my grandson's birthday party, my son handed me an old scarf and said, "Wear this to cover your old face. Don't embarrass the family." His wife and her relatives started to smile. But when the cake was brought out, I stood up and made an announcement about a gift for my grandson, an announcement that made my son's hands tremble. The sounds of logs crackling in the hearth, the ticking of an old clock. Today, my Sekou turns 10 years old. 10? It seems like only yesterday I held this small, screaming bundle in my arms, and Jamal, my son, looked at him with such confused, frightened awe. Now Sekou is a tall boy with his father's eyes and my smile. The morning started long before dawn. I love this time, when the house is still asleep, wrapped in silence and cool air. The air in the den still smells of yesterday, of apples and cooled wood from the fireplace. I walk to the kitchen, stepping on floorboards that creak in familiar places. This house is my entire life. My late husband, Elijah, and I didn't build it just for ourselves. We built it for the future, for Jamal, and as it turned out, for his family too. Every beam, every nail here remembers the warmth of our hands. I took out the flour. For Sekou's birthday, I always bake pastries, potato and cabbage hand pies, and his favorite, apple and cinnamon. The dough comes alive in my hands, becoming warm and pliable. It's a kind of magic, the only kind I still command. As I shaped one pie after another, memories surfaced. There was Jamal, tiny, his nose smeared with flour, trying to help. There was Elijah, coming in from the cold, dusting snow from his hat, reaching for a hot pie, burning his fingers. And then there was me, sitting alone at the same table, transferring the last part of Elijah's pension into the family business account. That business, a small freight and trucking company, Jamal started 5 years ago. He opened it with my money, with everything I had left from the sale of our city condo after Elijah passed. "Mama, this is our shared future," he'd said then, hot and convincing. "You'll live with us in this big house with fresh air, and I'll build an empire." The empire hasn't been built yet, but the debt certainly has. Every month, I sit down at my old father's writing desk, open a thick notebook, and tally the bottom line. Utilities for this enormous place, groceries for 4, car expenses, and the constant line item, business support. Sometimes it was $2,000, sometimes $5,000. I never asked what it was for exactly. I believed. A mother always believes her child, even when he's no longer a child but a 38-year-old man. Dior, my daughter-in-law, swept into the kitchen. She gave me a glance full of lazy disdain and wrinkled her perfect nose. "Still with your homemade pies, Aziza Amani? Who eats that stuff anymore? It's the last century. You should have ordered some trendy cupcakes or tartlets, so we wouldn't be embarrassed in front of our guests." She poured herself filter water and left, trailing expensive perfume and a faint chill. I didn't answer. I haven't answered her in a long time. Why bother? Words bounce off her like water off Teflon. Her world consists of designer clothes, exclusive resorts, and status connections. In that world, there was no room for my pies, my gray hair, or my wrinkles. I was as outdated as my baking, a useful yet shameful relic, the person who paid the bills and minded the house while they lived their full lives. By evening, the guests arrived, mostly Dior's relatives and friends, loud, self-assured people who surveyed my home with courteous, proprietary condescension. They praised the renovation Dior had done in the den, cold, gray, and impersonal, and loudly discussed their Christmas vacation plans to Miami or Cancun. I felt like hired help at someone else's party, a free accessory to my own home. Sekou was happy. He unwrapped his gifts, his eyes shining. A huge Lego set, a new tablet, a remote-controlled drone. I gave him a good, expensive encyclopedia about space. He had wanted it for a long time. He hugged me so tightly my breath hitched. "Thank you, Grandma. You're the best." In that moment, I was ready to forgive everything. The sidelong glances, the caustic remarks. All for this minute, for this pure, genuine joy. Then it was time for toasts, and Jamal, my son, rose with a glass. He looked a little strained, as if bracing himself for something. He said a few kind words about Sekou, and then turned to me. "We have gifts for everyone," he said in an unnaturally loud voice, drawing all eyes. "And we have one for our mother, too." He held out a small, carelessly wrapped bundle in crumpled paper. I took it. Inside a cheap cardboard box was a scarf, a dull, gray-brown, unpleasant-feeling synthetic thing, the kind they sell at flea market stalls for a few quarters. I raised my confused eyes to my son. Jamal wouldn't look at me. His gaze was fixed somewhere to the side on Dior, who watched him with an encouraging smile. And then he spoke the words that stopped time. "Here, Mama, put this on. Cover your old face. Don't embarrass the family in front of our guests." He didn't whisper it. He said it loudly, clearly, so everyone could hear, so that Dior's smug relatives could hear, so that my 10-year-old grandson could hear. A second of deafening silence followed. Then I saw their smiles. They weren't loud, but they were sharp, like glass shards. Dior smiled triumphantly. Her mother, a plump, pampered woman, covered her mouth with her hand, but her eyes laughed. Her cousin gave an approving grunt. They all looked at me with the same expression of fastidious superiority. In that moment, the world went silent for me. All the noise, the laughter, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, it all vanished. Only a ringing void remained, and this gallery of faces. My son's face avoiding my gaze, my daughter-in-law's full of malicious glee, her family's faces savoring my humiliation. I felt no pain, no tears welled up, no offense flared. No. It was as if something deep in my chest clicked, not with a groan, not with pain, but clearly, coldly, and conclusively, like the shutter of an expensive camera forever capturing a single frame, a frame that made everything clear, their relationship, my place, my future in the house that I built. In that instant, my blind maternal love died. Hope died. Aziza Amani, the accommodating, understanding, and forgiving mother and grandmother, died. And another woman was born, calm, cold, and completely clear-sighted. I sat with that ugly scarf on my lap, and the world slowly returned. Sounds started to emerge again. Someone nervously coughed. A fork clattered onto a plate. But the silence inside me didn't fade. It simply became different, thick, heavy, like deep water. I looked at my hands resting on my knees. All my life, these hands had been busy, kneading dough, scrubbing diapers, pulling weeds, counting bills to make ends meet. They built this house, they gave and gave, and now they were handed this cheap, slippery piece of synthetic fabric to cover an old face. So this was it, my price. This was the result of my life, my sacrifices, my love. I was an annoying inconvenience, a wallet that needed to be invisible, a ghost in my own house, smelling of mothballs and shame. Suddenly, I saw everything with astonishing icy clarity. Every innuendo, every eye roll from Dior, every plea from Jamal to be understanding and help out a little. They weren't accidents. They were steps on a staircase leading to this very moment, to this scarf. Slowly, year after year, they had been erasing me, stripping away my personality, leaving only a convenient function. And now they had decided that the function was fulfilled and could be discarded, covered with a rag like old furniture. My gaze swept the room and settled on Sekou. He sat at the table, a little embarrassed by the general awkwardness, picking at his salad with a fork. The only pure, bright person in this room, filled with poison. He hadn't understood the meaning of his father's words, but he felt that something bad, something wrong had happened. And in his bewildered eyes, I saw not my past, but his future. What kind of future awaited him with a father who so easily betrayed his own mother, and a mother who applauded it? What would they teach him? The same consumerism, the same cruelty, wrapped in fake smiles. They would mold him into someone just like them, a person for whom nothing was sacred except money and status. No, that would not happen. At that moment, Dior, recovering from her momentary triumph and wanting to smooth over the awkwardness, walked in with the birthday cake. 10 candles burned on it with bright, flickering lights. "Here's our birthday boy, Seiko, make a wish," she chirped, setting the cake in front of her son. The guests livened up, clapped, and broke into a round of happy birthday. Their voices sounded distant to me, as if coming from far away. I watched the candle flames, their reflection in my grandson's eyes, and while they sang, the decision fully matured inside me. Not an angry one, not a vengeful one, but a calm, calculated, and utterly unshakable one. The song ended. Sekou, taking a deep breath, blew out all the candles in one go. The room erupted in applause again. Jamal took the knife to cut the cake. His face was already placid again. He apparently thought the incident was over. His mother had swallowed the insult, just as she had swallowed everything else before. And then I stood up. All eyes immediately turned to me. They probably expected me to burst into tears or start reproaching them. Dior looked defiant. Jamal frowned. I surveyed everyone with a calm, attentive gaze, and my voice, when I spoke, surprised even me. It was even, firm, and completely devoid of emotion. "I have a gift for Sekou too," I said. "A gift for his future." Silence again descended upon the room. I looked at my grandson. "Sekou, your grandfather Elijah and I built this house years ago. We built it for our family, for the future. And today, on your 10th birthday, I want your future to have a solid foundation." I paused, letting the words sink in. "I am gifting you this entire property, the house, the acreage, and all the structures. I will process all the paperwork and place the property into a trust in your name. When you turn 21, you will become its sole owner." Dead silence. I saw the guests' faces drop. Dior froze, her mouth slightly open. Her face went from triumphant to bewildered, then utterly panicked. I continued, now looking directly at Jamal. "But the house is just walls. To ensure that your fund, Sekou, has the means for your education, your development, and life until you reach adulthood. I have made another decision. I am liquidating my share of our family business. All funds from the sale of my half of the assets will go into your trust fund." Now the silence was ringing. I saw Jamal go pale. The knife in his hand trembled. Not violently, but I noticed that short, small tremor, which gave everything away. He knew the truth of the situation. He knew this house was the only real valuable asset they had, and that the business was only afloat thanks to my constant infusions. But I saw something else in his eyes too. He didn't believe me. He figured it was just hysterics, a dramatic gesture from an offended old woman, an empty threat to grab attention. I calmly sat back down, took a napkin from the table, and politely said into the general void, "Cut the cake. It might melt." The evening ended quickly and awkwardly. The guests muttered something, hastily said their goodbyes, and left. Jamal and Dior pretended nothing had happened, but their cheerfulness was strained and false. They didn't say a word to me, no reproach, no question. They simply ignored me, deciding that tomorrow morning everything would return to normal. Late that night, when the house finally fell silent, I sat in my room. The infamous scarf lay on my bedside table. I looked at it not with resentment, but with gratitude. It was the stone that triggered the avalanche. It opened my eyes. I picked up the phone. I didn't have many numbers in my address book. I found the one I needed. My fingers didn't tremble. My chest was cold and calm. The phone rang for only a moment. "Hello?" came the familiar, slightly sharp voice of Yejide, my late husband's sister. "Yejide, hi, it's Aziza." "Hello, Azi, is something wrong? Your voice sounds strange." I smiled to myself. She always knew how to hear what was hidden. "Everything's fine, Yejide, better than it was. I need your advice, and a very good lawyer. Tomorrow morning." That night, I slept without dreams, deeply and calmly, as I hadn't slept in many years. For the first time in a long time, I woke up not with the usual heaviness in my chest, but with a feeling of emptiness. But it wasn't the bitter, painful emptiness of loss. It was a clean, clear emptiness, like crisp winter air, as if all the clutter accumulated over years in a room had finally been removed. And now the echo sings, and you can see how much light and space it actually holds. I got up, as usual, early and brewed myself real coffee, not the instant kind they drank, but Turkish coffee in a proper pot. Its bitter aroma filled the kitchen. I sat by the window overlooking the yard and watched the first rays of sun pierce through the branches of the old apple tree. The tree Elijah and I planted when Jamal was 5. Everything in this house, everything in this yard, was steeped in the past. But today I looked at it for the first time, not with nostalgia, but with a slight detachment, as if rereading a book whose plot I already knew by heart. They came downstairs around 10, Jamal and Dior. They walked together, as if preparing for an important diplomatic visit. Their faces wore condescending, slightly tired smiles, like those of wise adults about to pacify a capricious child. They approached my table. Dior sat on a chair opposite me, placing her manicured, well-cared-for hands on the table. "Good morning, Mama," she began in an artificially soft, ingratiating voice. "This is how you talk to the sick, or to those you don't consider your equals. We were a little too worked up yesterday. You said such things. It was a very dramatic statement." I silently took a sip of my coffee. It was scalding hot, and the bitterness in my mouth was pleasantly sobering. Jamal coughed, shifting his weight. This role was harder for him to play. "Mom, we get it. You were upset. That scarf, I didn't think. It was stupid. I'm sorry, but let's be realistic. Trusts, liquidations, those are just words said in anger." I continued to remain silent, looking out the window. I saw their reflection in the glass, 2 anxious figures leaning over me. "Aziza Amani," Dior spoke again, and a sharp, impatient edge rang in her voice. "This house is our shared nest. We've put so much effort into it. We renovated it. And the business, that's Jamal's. It's Seku's future. You can't just take it all away over a momentary slight. We are family." Family? What a strange alien word. I looked at them, at my son hiding his eyes, and at his wife talking about the nest that I had built and maintained as if it were her own property. They were talking to me like an unreasonable child who had a tantrum in a toy store because they weren't bought candy. They were explaining why my decisions regarding my own property were unrealistic. They weren't asking, they weren't trying to understand. They were lecturing. I finished my coffee and placed the cup on the saucer. It clinked with a quiet, clear sound. I stood up. "I need to go to the yard," I said in an even voice, without looking at them. "The peonies need staking." And I walked out. I heard Dior exhale in irritation behind me. I knew what they were thinking. The old woman is senile. She's sulking. It will pass soon. They understood nothing, and that was their main mistake. In the afternoon, I sat on the porch with a book. The house was quiet. Jamal had left, ostensibly for business. Dior was upstairs in their master's suite. At some point, the silence was broken by her voice, loud and irritated. She was on the phone. The walls in this house are thick, but fury, like water, finds the cracks. "Jamal, what the heck is going on?" she almost screamed into the receiver. "I'm trying to make the down payment for the cherry red Cadillac Escalade. Yes, that one. I found the perfect deal, and it says, transaction declined." A pause. I turned a page, although I wasn't seeing the letters. "What do you mean, check the balance?" I checked it. "What do you mean, insufficient funds? That's our premium account. Your paycheck just cleared yesterday." I imagined her face, contorted and angry. That car had been her dream for months, a symbol of their success, their new level. A celebratory purchase, as she'd boasted to a friend yesterday, to mark the start of their new life. "No, the card is right here." Then what? The bank? Why would the bank? Hold on. A long, ringing pause followed. I knew what was happening in her head. The small gears of vanity and suspicion were turning and clicked into place. "It's her!" Dior shrieked. "It's definitely her! That old witch blocked the card or called the bank and made up some story. I told you, we shouldn't have left her alone like this. We should have taken action immediately. But you kept saying, Mama, Mama. She's getting petty old lady revenge the only way she knows how. I closed the book, got up, and went into the house to make myself some tea. I heard her continue to scream into the phone, promising to sort things out and put her in her place. They thought I had stolen their candy. They thought I was playing their game, the game of petty malice, grudges, and manipulation. They couldn't even imagine that I wasn't playing anymore, that I had walked off the board. They thought I had stolen one pawn. Meanwhile, I was quietly flipping over the entire chessboard. I brewed my tea, and my soul was calm. Their panic, their anger, their absolute misunderstanding of the situation were the best confirmation that I was doing everything right. Every step they took, every word they spoke, only solidified my righteousness. And I knew this was only the first, smallest ripple in the water. The real storm was still ahead. The next morning, I got ready and drove into the city. Jamal and Dior watched me with silent reproach and suspicion. They probably figured I was going to the bank to continue my petty mischief. Let them think that. Their world had narrowed to one blocked credit card. They couldn't imagine where I was actually headed. Yejide had given me the address of a law firm in the old downtown area. The office was in a stately, pre-war building with high ceilings and quiet hallways. The lawyer, attorney Thurgood Hayes, turned out to be a man in his 50s with attentive, calm eyes and gray at his temples. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He just listened. I sat in a deep leather armchair across from his massive oak desk and methodically, without emotion, laid out the facts. I told him about the house, which was entirely in my name, about the business, where I was a 50% co-owner, about my desire to establish a trust fund for my grandson and to liquidate my stake in the firm to do so. I spoke, and he took notes in a pad, nodding occasionally. Aziza Amani, I understand, he said when I finished. The situation is clear, and so is the action plan. To start the procedure, I need all the foundational documents for the company and the financial statements for the last year. The more complete the documentation, the faster we can move. I was prepared for this. I was accustomed to order over the years. At home, in my old dresser, I had a separate folder where I kept everything related to the family business. All contracts, all bank statements, all receipts for my transfers. I kept them not out of distrust, but simply out of habit. A habit instilled by my own father, who was an accountant. Money loves counting, and documents love order, he used to say. I handed Attorney Hayes a thick folder. He put on his glasses and methodically began to study its contents, page by page. Silence fell in the office, broken only by the rustle of papers. I looked out the window at the clouds drifting across the sky and felt strangely calm. I was in the right place. I was doing what I had to do. 20 minutes passed. Attorney Hayes remained silent, only occasionally frowning and underlining something with a pencil. Then he stopped at one of the latest bank reports. He stared at it for a long time, then removed his glasses and looked at me over the top of them. Aziza Amani, I have a question for you. Right here, 3 weeks ago, a very large sum, almost $300,000, was deposited into the company account. Was this a new investor, or did you sell some assets? I looked at him, confused. 300,000? No, there were no investors, and we didn't sell anything. I would know. Strange. He put his glasses back on and slid the document toward me, pointing to the line. Look here. Credit Tranche, Financial Guarantor. Do you know this organization? I peered at the line. The name meant nothing to me. No, I've never heard of it. We always use the same major bank for credit, and only for small amounts of working capital. The lawyer's face grew serious. He leaned back in his chair. Financial Guarantor is not a bank. It's a microcredit organization for businesses. They give large sums at very high interest rates and with draconian penalties for late payment. Businesses only turn to them in the most desperate situations. Tell me, did your son mention taking out such a large loan? No, not a word. The chill I had first felt at my grandson's birthday party began to rise from deep in my chest again. But now it was different. It was alarming. Attorney Hayes fell silent, flipping through the papers further. His fingers stopped on the last page of the report. "And this is even more interesting," he said softly. "This sum, $300,000, stayed in the company account for less than 24 hours, and the very next day, the full amount was transferred to a personal account." Wait a minute. "To the personal account of your daughter-in-law, Dior Pasternak. The payment purpose reads, repayment of non-interest loan agreement." The air in the office grew thick. I looked at the lawyer, but I saw Dior's face before me. Her triumphant smile that evening, her screams on the phone about buying a new cherry-red car. "Aziza Amani, obtaining a loan like this requires the consent and signature of all co-owners, meaning yours too. Did you sign any loan agreements last month?" "No," my voice sounded muffled. "Nothing." Attorney Hayes stood up, went to a cabinet, and pulled out a thin folder. "Just as I thought. When Yejidi contacted me, with her permission, I made a preliminary inquiry into the corporate registry. Here is a copy of the loan agreement with financial guarantor." He opened the folder and placed it in front of me. On the last page, in the co-owner 2 slot, there was a signature. My signature. Or rather, one very similar to it, but somehow uncertain, shaky, as if a stranger's hand had painstakingly copied it from a sample. I stared at that forged signature, and the picture clicked into place. It didn't just click. It seared me with its cynical, ugly completeness. They weren't just living off me. They weren't just disrespecting me. They were setting a trap. The plan was simple and monstrous. Take out a huge loan in the company's name with my forged signature. Quickly transfer the money to their personal account, buy the new car with it, maybe make a down payment on a place in Buckhead. And then just abandon everything. Abandon the company with a massive debt at unimaginable interest rates. And I, as the co-owner, would have been forced to pay that debt from my pension, selling this house, the only thing I had left. They weren't just planning to leave. They were planning to leave me destitute, in ruins, facing shame and a debt trap in my old age. The scarf Jamal gave me wasn't just a cruel joke. It was a parting gift, a symbolic gesture. Cover your face, Mama. You're about to be very embarrassed. Disappear. In that moment, the last ember of feeling, of pity, of doubt that still glowed within me, died. Everything was burned to ashes. Only a cold, hard, granite-like calm remained. I raised my eyes to the lawyer. "Attorney Hayes," I said, my voice steady, without a tremor or a tear. "Make a copy of that agreement and start the procedure. But now, not just the liquidation of my share. I want a full dissolution of the partnership with a forensic audit of all financial transactions for the last year. And prepare official notices for my son and for the bank where all our accounts are held." He nodded silently. He understood everything without further explanation. I left his office a different woman. The woman who walked in an hour ago could still doubt, could still regret. The woman who walked out was going to carry out a sentence. I returned home in the evening. The air in the house was heavy, electrified. Dior demonstratively refused to speak to me, only shooting short, angry glances in my direction. Jamal tried to act carefree, talking loudly on the phone about some prospective deals. But I saw the tension in his shoulders. They were waiting. They were waiting for me to apologize, to surrender, to beg forgiveness for my hysterics. They were still living in their world, where I was just a minor character in their play. I silently went to my room. I had nothing to say to them. All the words had already been spoken there in the quiet office of the lawyer. Now, the documents would speak. For 2 days, a cold war reigned in the house. They demonstratively ordered pizza and sushi delivery, leaving piles of boxes in the kitchen. They talked to each other as if I didn't exist. I, meanwhile, lived my own life, tending to the yard, reading, preparing simple food for myself. Inside me, was silence. I felt neither anger nor triumph, only cold, quiet anticipation. I knew the mechanism had been engaged, and now it couldn't be stopped. And then, on the third day after my visit to the lawyer, it happened. I was watering the roses by the porch when a small courier van pulled up to the gate. A young man in a uniform jacket stepped out. "Jamal Amani?" he asked, checking his tablet. "Need a signature for receipt." At that moment, Dior came out of the house. She must have seen the van from the window. Her face was etched with impatient curiosity. "Perhaps these are the documents for her new car?" "I'm his wife, I can sign," she said briskly, holding out her hand. The courier handed her 2 thick white envelopes and the tablet. She carelessly scrawled her signature and, without waiting for him to drive away, impatiently tore open the first envelope. I continued to prune the faded rosebuds. I wasn't looking at her, but in my periphery, I saw everything. I saw her expensively manicured fingers tear the thick paper, saw her pull out a folded sheet, saw her eyes begin to scan the lines. First, her face showed bewilderment. She was clearly expecting to see something else. Then her eyebrows knitted together. She flipped the sheet over, then returned to the beginning, and I saw her face change, slowly but inevitably, as if a completely different essence was emerging from beneath the thin layer of makeup and self-assurance. Color drained from her cheeks. The blush she so carefully applied each morning disappeared, leaving behind a deathly chalky white. Her lips, always slightly pouting with petulance, parted in silent astonishment. She silently opened the second envelope. This one was from their main bank. The letter was shorter. She scanned it in seconds, and her face turned into a mask of pure terror. The envelope slipped from her weakened fingers and fluttered onto the porch steps. "Jamal!" Her voice wasn't a scream, but a hoarse, choked gasp. "Jamal, get out here now!" The door flew open, and Jamal ran out onto the porch. "What happened? What's all the shouting for?" he began, irritated, but seeing his wife's face, he stopped short. "What is this?" she whispered, pointing to the papers lying on the ground. Jamal frowned, picking up the first sheet. I saw his profile. First, a condescending smirk. He probably thought it was just another piece of junk mail from some marketing agency, but then the smirk slid off his face. He started reading. His eyes widened. He clenched the paper so tightly, his knuckles turned white. His bravado, his feigned confidence, it all crumbled off him like plaster from an old wall. I saw those terrifying official words, words I now knew by heart, dancing before his eyes. Notice of intent to terminate partnership agreement, compulsory asset liquidation, full forensic accounting audit, commencement of legal action. He snatched up the second sheet. The bank notice, short and ruthless, in connection with information received regarding possible fraudulent activities by one of the co-owners, pursuant to Section 7.4 of the loan agreement, all credit lines and overdraft facilities on company name accounts are frozen, pending the outcome of an internal investigation. He stood there, holding those 2 sheets of paper, breathing heavily. Air whistled into his lungs. The condescension was gone. The irritation was gone. Only pure, primal, animal fear remained. The panic of a man who had run a marathon, certain of his victory, only to discover a step from the finish line that he had been running on the wrong road, and now a precipice awaited him instead of a pedestal. He raised his eyes to me. There was not a shred of the condescension with which he had looked at me 3 days ago. There was horror and incomprehension, an utter shock that this was even possible. This couldn't be happening. It was just old lady hysterics, just a slight, just a stupid scarf. It couldn't have led to this. "Mama," he whispered, What is this?" I silently set down the pruning shears, straightened up, and looked him directly in the eyes, calmly and firmly. "It's not hysterics, Jamal," I said in an even voice. "It's not a slight, and it's not petty revenge." I paused, giving him time to absorb my words. "It's a legal execution." Dior let out a strange, choked sob. She looked from me to her husband, to the papers in his hands. Horror washed over her eyes. It had finally dawned on her. This wasn't a game. This was a war, and they had already lost. The silence that followed my words didn't last long. It was just the calm before the storm. I saw the fear in Jamal's eyes give way to rage, the last refuge of a cornered animal. He crumpled the papers in his fists and stepped toward me. Dior, snapping out of her stupor, followed him. They didn't go into the den. They burst into my room, my only private space in the house. I sat in the old armchair by the window, and they stood over me like two thunderclouds. "What have you done?" Jamal began. His voice cracked with fury. He threw the crumpled sheets onto the small table next to me. "Are you out of your mind, old woman? Decided to destroy everything? To destroy me, your only son?" I remained silent. I just looked at him, at his face distorted by anger, at the vein bulging on his neck. I didn't see a grown man. I saw a frightened boy whose favorite toy had been taken away. Behind him, Dior started her performance. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed loudly, dramatically, hysterically. They weren't tears of grief, but tears of rage and helplessness. "Our house, our business, Seku's future," she wailed through her sobs. "How could you? Don't you have a heart? You're a grandmother. Do you want your grandson to be penniless for us to be out on the street? Why such cruelty?" It was a storm, a hurricane of accusations, reproaches, and emotional blackmail. They worked as a pair, like a well-rehearsed duo. He pressed the buttons of filial duty and my guilt. She played the chords of the grandson's future and family values, the very values they themselves had trampled on days earlier. "I slaved away for you my whole life," Jamal shouted, waving his arms. "Tried to build something so you could live in comfort, so everyone had everything. And you erased it all with a stroke of a pen over some stupid scarf, over senile dementia." He paused to catch his breath, and Dior instantly took over. "We took you into our home, cared for you, and this is how you repay us? With black ingratitude. You're just a spiteful, angry old woman who hates our happiness in your own house." For a moment, those words stung in the house I built and paid for. But the pain wasn't sharp anymore. It was just a dull, familiar echo of the past. They shouted for a long time, venting everything, their resentment, their fear, their anger. They blamed me for everything, for their failure, their debt, their problems. I was a convenient target. In their worldview, I was at fault, not their greed, not their weakness, not their deceit. I sat and waited. I was like a cliff face battered by waves. They crash, foam, and pour all their fury upon it, but the cliff stands firm. It simply waits for the storm to subside, and I knew it would subside. They didn't have an infinite reserve of energy. The moment finally came. Jamal was hoarse. His rage was spent. All that was left was heavy, exhausted gasping. Dior stopped sobbing, and now just quietly, convulsively sniffled, darting looks at me to gauge the effect. They were worn out. Silence returned to the room, filled with the smell of their anger and my calm. I waited another minute, and then slowly, without a single wasted movement, I leaned down and retrieved a single sheet of paper from the desk drawer, the copy Attorney Hayes had made for me. I placed it on the small table in front of them, right on top of the crumpled notice. Jamal looked at the sheet with confusion. Dior stopped sniffling and craned her neck with curiosity. Jamal reached out, took the paper, and smoothed it. I watched his eyes scan the familiar official lines of the loan agreement. He still didn't understand. He probably thought it was another document from the same series. And then his gaze fell on the last page, on the co-owner 2 slot, on the signature. I saw the last drop of blood drain from his face. He froze, staring at that forged, clumsy scrawl that was meant to be my sentence. His shoulders slumped, the paper dropped from his fingers and slowly fluttered onto the rug. Dior, not understanding, bent down and picked up the sheet. She peered at it. Her eyes widened. She shifted her gaze from the signature to me, then back to the signature. There was no remorse in her eyes. There was the primal terror of being caught. And then I spoke, softly, almost a whisper, but in that deafening silence, my voice rang out like a bell. "You shouted, after everything we've done for you, I looked directly into my son's eyes. "Did you mean after everything you've done to me?" Silence. Absolute, dead silence. They had no words. All their accusations, all their shouts, all their tears, they all shattered against that single sheet of paper. Their meticulously constructed drama about the ungrateful mother collapsed, exposing the ugly truth of their own betrayal. They looked at me, and for the first time in many years, they saw me for who I truly was. Not as the help, not as the wallet, not as the old capricious mother. They saw the person who knew everything about them, who held the evidence of their crime in her hands. In that moment, I understood that all the power belonged to me. And it wasn't the power of revenge, it was the power of truth. And it was devastating. After that scene in my room, the house sank into a strange, viscous silence. They stopped shouting. They went into hiding, walking around the house like shadows, talking in whispers. Their fear was almost palpable. But I knew this wasn't the end. A cornered animal doesn't give up. It prepares for one last desperate lunge. I didn't know what form it would take, but I was certain they would try something. Their final attempt turned out to be even baser and more cynical than I could have imagined. 2 days later, on a Saturday, Dior approached me with an unnaturally meek, sorrowful face. "Aziza Amani," she said in a quiet, respectful voice I had never heard from her. "We are very worried about you, about your state. We understand you aren't doing this out of malice. We invited my parents and my uncle over this evening just to have a family discussion, to find a way out of this terrible situation. Please, don't refuse." A family council. I immediately understood what kind of council this was and what my role in it would be. It was their last, dirtiest card. They intended to stage a performance where I was the senile, unstable old woman, influenced by bad advice and destroying her own family. And they were the unhappy, loving children trying to save both me and themselves. I calmly nodded. "Fine, I'll be there." Her eyes flashed with triumph for a moment. She was sure I had walked into their trap. That evening, their tribunal gathered in the den. Dior's parents arrived, her mother, plump and gleaming with self-satisfaction, and her father, a stern man with a heavy gaze who had always looked at me as if I were empty space. Her uncle, some local mid-level county official whose demeanor exuded authority and self-confidence, also came. I was seated in an armchair in the center of the room. They arranged themselves around me, forming a tight circle. The atmosphere was like an interrogation. Jamal started. He spoke in a choked voice, full of sorrow. He talked about how I had always been a wonderful mother, but lately I had been unlike myself, withdrawn, suspicious, acting irrationally. He didn't mention the scarf or his words at all. Instead, he painted a picture of my slow decline. Then Dior took the floor. She cried, this time quietly and convincingly. She recounted how she and Jamal feared for me, how my actions were jeopardizing the future of their son, my grandson. She brought up Yejide. She's a jealous, lonely woman who always disliked us and is now manipulating an elderly person. She hinted at the need for guardianship, at the fact that I needed to be protected from myself. Her relatives listened, nodding sympathetically. Dior's mother chimed in, yes, this happens with older folks. Clouded judgment. Poor children, the mother said to them. What a cross you have to bear. The uncle frowned and delivered a line like, yes, measures must be taken here. Can't let it slide. I sat and kept silent. I watched this circus with cold detachment. They played their parts, confident in their success. They were in their element, surrounded by their people, and they believed I was alone against all of them. Dior's father, Mr. Igor Pasternak, turned to me. Aziza Amani, he said in a heavy, patronizing tone. You must understand. Your children only want what's best for you. Maybe you should take a break, go to a nice assisted living facility, get some treatment, and they will sort out the affairs themselves. At that very moment, when their victory seemed so close, the door to the den quietly opened. Yejide stood on the threshold. She was holding a thick folder in her hand. "Good evening," she said in her usual, slightly sharp voice. "I apologize for the intrusion. I heard you were having a family financial council here. I didn't mean to interrupt." Jamal and Dior froze, their faces stretched. They hadn't expected this. Yejide calmly walked into the room, went to the large dining table, and placed her folder on it. "I'm very timely," she continued, looking around at everyone assembled with a sharp, piercing gaze. "I'm a retired forensic accountant after all, and when my sister-in-law, Aziza, came to me for advice, I naturally couldn't stand aside. I took the liberty of preparing a brief report to make it clearer what we're all talking about." She opened the folder. From it, she extracted several printouts stapled together. "Let's start simple." She placed the first sheet on the table. "This is a summary of all money transfers from Aziza Amani's accounts to company name accounts over the last 5 years. The total amount, as you can see, is $742,000. This doesn't include her pension, which went entirely to maintaining this house." She paused. The room was silent. "And here is the second document." She placed it on the table. "This is a statement of major expenditures from the company's corporate accounts. Trips to resorts, luxury restaurants, purchases of expensive clothing, 2 cars for Dior Pasternak. I won't bore you with details. I'll just say that less than 30% went to operational needs." Dior's mother's face slowly began to turn crimson. The uncle stopped looking self-assured and now stared at his niece with unconcealed interest. "And now, the cherry on top." Yejide pulled out the last document, a copy of that very loan agreement. "Here's a very interesting document. A loan for $300,000, taken out 3 weeks ago, collateralized by the entire business. As you can see, it's signed by both co-owners. Here's Jamal Amani's signature. And here," she tapped her fingernail on the second signature, "is allegedly Aziza Amani's signature. Only there's one small problem. On the day this agreement was signed, Aziza Amani was in a rehabilitation facility in coastal Georgia, where she goes every year. I have the reservation, the transport receipts, and the registration log from the facility. So this signature, as they say in certain circles, is an object of very interesting examination. That would be Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. 1344, bank fraud, or at the very least, forgery." She fell silent. And in that silence, the words bank fraud sounded like a gunshot. Dior was white as a sheet. Jamal stared at the floor, his neck crimson. Mr. Igor Pasternak, Dior's father, slowly stood up. He was terrifying in his silent rage. He walked to the table, picked up the copy of the agreement, and peered at it. Then he looked at his daughter. It was a look filled with such icy contempt and shame that for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. "You have disgraced our family," he said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You have brought shame upon my name." He turned and, without another word, walked to the exit. His wife and brother, stumbling, hurried after him. The humiliation was complete, public, and final. They had wanted to stage a tribunal for me, but they found themselves on the scaffold of their own disgrace. When the door closed behind them, Jamal and Dior remained sitting in the middle of the den in complete, stunning silence. Their world hadn't collapsed instantly, but slowly, inevitably. And now they sat amidst its ruins. That evening, they didn't say another word to me, and the next morning, while I was in the yard, they packed their things and left, quietly, without scandal, like thieves. The events of the following months unfolded in a businesslike, almost unemotional flurry. Attorney Hayes and Yejide took charge. The process of dissolving the firm began. The audit exposed all their schemes. To avoid criminal prosecution, Jamal had to agree to everything. The debt to financial guarantor was fully repaid from his share of the business assets sale. After all payments and settlements, he and Dior were left with almost nothing. They had to sell the car. A new condo was out of the question. I heard from Yejide that they rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Jamal got a job as a simple driver for another trucking company. Their life, built on my money and their lies, had crumbled to dust. The house, my house, was also sold. I felt no regret. It had stopped being my home long before this. It had become just a building, a repository of bad memories. Buyers were found quickly, a young family with 2 children. Looking at them, I saw that the house was going into good hands. All legal formalities were observed. A significant educational trust fund was established for Sekou. The money in it was securely protected, and no one but him, upon reaching 21, could touch it. I knew I had given him the most important gift, a chance at a future independent of his parents' mistakes. 3 months have passed. I stand on my small balcony. Below me stretches a small southern coastal town, immersed in the greenery of cypress trees. And beyond that, to the horizon, the sea, endless, alive, breathing. The air here is different. It doesn't smell of apples from the yard or the dampness of an old house. It smells of salt, sun-warmed stone, and freedom. My apartment is small but bright, 2 bedrooms and a kitchen. I don't need more. The walls are painted a creamy white, and the sun, peering into the windows in the mornings, floods everything with a warm, honeyed light. There is no old, bulky furniture here, no memory of the past. Everything is new, light, simple. I place a bouquet of freshly cut wildflowers, which I bought today at the local farmer's market, into a vase. My movements are light, free from the burden of years of obligations. I no longer have to wake up before dawn to feed a family. I don't have to count every dime to patch holes in someone else's budget. I don't have to startle at the sound of footsteps outside the door. I brew myself some thyme tea and sit in a wicker chair on the balcony. Next to me on the small table is a letter. The envelope is decorated with an amateurish child's drawing, a sun, seagulls, and the blue sea. It's a letter from Sekou. Yejide takes him for weekends and helps us communicate. I unfold the sheet. Inside are a few lines written in printed letters and another drawing. He drew me and himself. We are standing on the shore, flying a kite. "Grandma, hi," he writes. "I'm doing okay. I miss you a lot. Mom and Dad are always arguing, but I try not to listen. I'm reading your space book. It's so cool. When I grow up, I'm coming to live with you by the ocean. We will fly the kite every day. I love you. Your Sekou." I fold the letter and press it to my chest. Tears well up in my eyes, but they are not tears of grief or resentment. They are tears of quiet, bright sorrow and love. I know he will come, and we will definitely fly that kite. I look at the sea, at its endless, measured rhythm. The waves roll onto the shore and recede, roll and recede, just like life, tides and ebbs. My long, drawn-out ebb tide has finally ended. I am 62 years old. For some, this is old age, the sunset. For me, it is the dawn of my own separate life, a life I didn't even dare to dream of, a life where I belong only to myself, where every breath is filled not with anxiety, but with peace, where every day is not a sacrifice, but a gift. The sun sets beyond the horizon, painting the sky in soft watercolor tones. A light breeze carries the sounds of music and laughter from the boardwalk. I smile. For the first time in many years, I'm smiling not for anyone else, but just because. To myself, to the new day, to the sea. I built a home for my family. Finally, the time has come to build a home for myself. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.